Many people that don't have anything to do really with the church or haven't maybe ever picked up a Bible have some things from the Bible that they're aware of, because some things make their way into general conversations. And like example of that might be David and Goliath. You don't have to live your whole life through to realize who's the big guy and who's the little guy and who won. That comes in handy for all of us when giants of all forms show up into our life. Notice I said many know these things. I didn't say all. I was reminded of that before seminary when I was a fourth grade teacher at EB Elementary School in Napoleon, Michigan. And there was a senior in high school, we'll call her Sarah Ann. Sarah Ann would come every morning and she would take calls before school started, and then she would go across the street to the high school. Maybe people were calling in to say their children weren't coming to school, or maybe a teacher even found out late that he or she wasn't going to make it. So Sarah Ann would take those calls. It was Friday and it had been raining all week. When I walked in, as I always saw her in the morning, she said, "Is this ever going to stop raining?" And I said, "I don't know. There's that time it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. She said, "You're from Indiana. Did it happen there?" I said, no, it didn't happen there. Actually, it's a story from the Bible, and the story goes that it rained for 40 days and for 40 nights, and that the whole world got flooded. She said, "Oh my gosh, what did they do then?" I said, "Well, Noah built an ark." She says, "What's an ark?" "It's a boat." And what happened was some folks were on the boat, and then he worked to save some of all kinds of animals. And she said, "Boy, that was lucky, wasn't it?" I said, "That's what we think about that story, yes. That's what we think." The story of the time. That, she said, "Well, I told you, I'm just not into church stuff." And I said, "God loves everybody anyway." And so then she said, "I do know some stuff, though. I know that Jesus was born on Christmas Day, and my cousin was born on Christmas Day, too." I said, "Big day in your family, I would guess." She said, "I know another thing, because my grandma and grandpa love wine. And sometime when their stash gets a little low, grandpa always says, 'Boy, we need Jesus today to turn water into wine.'" I said, "See, you've got a lot of Bible knowledge, really." Well, Sarah Ann and her references will not reflect the life that, as I followed her after that time, she led. You'll hear more about her later. Walking on water is another story that has made its way into some people's ideas about something that came from the Bible. What we don't often focus on, though, even those of us that hear the story over and over, is really the point of why Jesus walked on water, because that seems to be the most important part of the story. Jesus walked on water to be with his people. Jesus walked on water to be with his people. Now, if you wonder who Jesus' people are, it's recorded in our bulletin every week right before the offering. And it says that we are followers of Jesus, called to love, include, and serve all people, no exception. It's a good place to put that in the bulletin, because as we serve through giving of our money and our talents and our time, we are doing that not just for the people that come through the door or anybody's doors on Sunday morning, but for all God's people into which we are called for care. Jesus needed to be with his 12 disciples that day when he walked on the water. What was going on, as you heard Jim read, was Jesus had just gotten through feeding the 5,000. We sometimes have a hard time getting enough people to sign up for Family Promise, imagine. But we don't have that little boy and his loaves and fish, so we have to come up with that with someone else. Jesus has just gotten over that particular part, and he was tired. So he dismissed his miracle crowd, and he went up to the mountain to pray. He went up to the mountain to pray, and he told his disciples, get in the boat and cross to the other side. By the time Jesus was ready to join them after his time of prayer, a huge storm had erupted. And Jesus walked on water to be with his people. They were caught in one of life's storms, and he didn't want them to be alone. It's a great message to us. Jesus wants us to know that when it comes to being alone, we never are. When it comes to being alone, we never are. Whatever boat we find ourselves in, we're not alone there. Whatever sinking feeling we're having, we're not having it alone. That day, it was Peter and his sinking feeling. And Peter would say to us, not just a sinking feeling, the water was up to my whatever it was up to. He would have been there too to have told us he thought there was no way out. And of all the disciples, wouldn't it have been Peter that would have done what he did that got him into that trouble? Peter, we know him well. He's in many of the stories in the New Testament. And he'd been told, as the other disciples had for some time now, you will do all I can do. You will do what I do. He'd been telling his inner group. And Peter likely thought, gosh, if I can do what Jesus can do, maybe I can walk on water right now. It would be Peter, who was always opening his mouth in inappropriate times. Peter doing outlandish things, talking when he should have remained silent, and speaking out when he should not, and not speaking out when he should have been loud and standing tall with his voice of faith. Overzealous Peter, promising undying devotion to Jesus, and then, when times got tough for him, swearing that he'd never even heard of Jesus before. I love Peter. Peter is every one of us. Peter is every one of us, so no matter how we feel that we stack up, on the days that we wonder and worry about that, there's Peter matching you day for day. For we get that sinking feeling in our heart too. Like when someone says to us we have not done very well, when we know on that given day we gave it all we had to give. Like when we have some kind of feeling of dread about what just happened or what might be around the corner, or times when we feel in the moment discouragement, or when good things happen, like love and promotions, and we're not so sure we deserve it. We're not so sure we can walk right into it where we're called to walk. Our storms show up in so many ways. Sometimes we feel we're battered by circumstances beyond our control. Sometimes, even when the circumstances are pretty much in our control, we screw them up anyway. That's happened to me. I've been there, done that. We all get our turn in the kind of boat that we read about today. None of us goes through life unbattered and unscathed. And yet, in spite of all this, maybe even because of all this, Peter, along with James and John, shared an intimacy with Jesus somehow unlike any of the other disciples. I figure they had their close stories as well, but we have Peter's before us so often. In fact, Jesus is saying to us, Peter is human, just like you. The turbulent waves that come are bound to bring sinking feelings in their midst to all. In fact, Jesus is saying to us right now, name your wave. What you fear might take you under. One's always hanging around, messing with our life. interrupting our thoughts and disturbing our sleep and denying our peace. Those times just don't seem to be things we can always avoid. But if you're lucky enough right now that your sea is pretty calm, there's somebody you really care about who's having a sinking feeling. Their turbulent wave splashes right up over you because you care about them too. And you carry, just as Jesus did, their life with you as well. The most important message for today is that Jesus doesn't stand outside of our life circumstances. Jesus stands right there within them. Jesus with us, just where we are. We are always, you are always right in the middle of sacred space. And why not? The disciples knew it that day when they said, "With us is surely the Son of God." Jesus is always redeeming and restoring us and all people. The times of our boldness are signs we're close to Jesus. And the times we find ourselves leaning into feelings of weakness, those sinking feeling times, they are also signs for us that we're close to Christ, to God. Jesus walking on water and right into the midst of us, always there to be with his people. For he wants us to be sure and certain that we and all people are never alone. What we're talking about today is our faith in God. We come here to hear songs about, to sing about, to be read to, and to hear sermons, and to have fellowship that reminds us of our faith in God. But hear this and never forget it. We come to church, we listen to the songs, we hear what's read, that we read together and what's spoken. We hear that and realize that we are talking too about God's faith in us. God's faith in us. That needs to be mentioned with great regularity. Otherwise, we keep wondering if we are falling short. For just like Peter and his moments failing in today's text, when his human perception of reality overwhelmed, for a time, his perception of divine power, he then sees again. He then remembers again. He then experiences again that God's power is loose in the world and up so close and personal within him and with each of us that we are told we are never alone. None of us, ever. Some way that call was learned by, let's call her Sarah Ann, that senior in high school who came and answered the phone on weekday mornings. That girl who said, "I'm just not much into church." I kind of followed her life, and she never was a part of any kind of organized religion, or on some of our days, disorganized religion. But she became an RN, and I've known many fabulous ones, and none can beat her record. Her record of caring for people and their families, her record of standing beside people, her record of equipping people who feel very unequipped to meet whatever the next moment and day is before them. And she spent her whole life like that. She spent her whole life outside of what we might say would be people of faith, and there was no more person better than Sarah at being that faith with others. And faith-filled God never checked her credentials. Never checked her credentials or found out what book she'd signed when she said those words at baptism. I lean into and I rest in the way in which God empowers us all. Now, I have to say that I've been a part of church every single day of my 77 years. And I've been very glad to be there. And I have recommended church to many, many people throughout my life. I can say, too, that I have never been more sure of that recommendation as I am of the Episcopal Church and the people it loves and includes and the walk that it has. And its call to the joy-filled service, even when you think you're sinking a little in the water. God makes ready and available God's hand to touch the lives of all in their sinking times and assures around them, around you, around me, around all of the people we love so, and around all people that God cares about, includes, empowers all people, no exception. And God calls us to do the same. And aren't you glad? Amen.